The year is 1790. The revolution is over. The Constitution, barely 2 years old, is still fragile. An experiment, more idea than nation. Across the 13 states, people call themselves Americans now. But what does that mean? Is it a matter of birth? Of loyalty? Of blood? Who exactly belongs to this new republic? Because in the spring of 1790, the United States Congress sits down to answer that question for the very first time. And the answer they give will shape the meaning of American for centuries to come. Philadelphia, capital of the young nation, a city of 40,000 souls. Horse-drawn carriages clatter down muddy streets. Merchants haggle over rum and tobacco. In taverns, men argue over politics, the Constitution, the taxes, the meaning of liberty. Here, inside Congress Hall, the same men who once rebelled against a king are now the architects of something untested. A republic built on citizenship, not subjects. But that's the problem. No country like this has ever existed before. Monarchies grant subjects. Empires rule over conquered people. But a republic, that requires something different. Citizens. And the question before them now, who counts as one, will prove more radical, more diversive than any imagined. From the very beginning, America was a land of newcomers. In 1790, nearly 1 in 5 white Americans had been born abroad, in England, Ireland, Scotland, or Germany. The Revolution had inspired thousands to cross the Atlantic, seeking not riches, but freedom. Freedom from tyranny, from poverty, from hierarchy. They came to build, to farm, to believe in something new. And in so doing, they forced the nation to ask, if liberty is a right, can it belong only to those born here? In March 1790, Congress took up a small but monumental task to write the first Naturalization Act, a law defining how immigrants could become citizens of the United States. On paper, it seemed simple, but beneath the surface, it cut straight to the contradictions of the American experiment. The Revolution had declared all men are created equal, but equality, it turns out, had boundaries, because the men debating this law, Washington, Adams, Jefferson's allies, lived in a world of hierarchy. Many of them owned enslaved people. Some feared immigrants from foreign nations would corrupt the purity of the republic. Still, others, especially those shaped by enlightened ideals, believed America should be a refuge for the oppressed. In that tension, the debate began. In the House of Representatives, Congressman James Madison of Virginia, the father of the Constitution, rose to speak. He argued that immigration was vital to the nation's growth. It is not possible, he said, to confine our population within the present limits. America needed new citizens, men of industry and talent, to build its farms, its factories, its future. But not everyone agreed. Representative Fisher Ames of Massachusetts worried that open naturalization would flood the country with foreign adventurers, men who might not share the same values or loyalty. Others feared something deeper, that too many newcomers might dilute the fragile unity of this young republic. In truth, they were debating not just who could join the nation, but what the nation was. Was it a universal republic of liberty? or an exclusive community of chosen people. After weeks of discussion, the first Naturalization Act passed on March 26, 1790. It was just a single page long, barely 200 words, but those words would echo for generations. It declared that any alien, being a free white person, of good moral character could apply for citizenship after 2 years' residence in the United States. That phrase, free white person, would become one of the most consequential in American history. Because in a single stroke, the founders drew a radical line around the meaning of citizenship. Freedom was declared universal in principle, but belonging, legal, political, civil belonging, was limited to a select few. Black Americans, even those who were free, were excluded. Native peoples, the original inhabitants of the continent, were not even considered, and women, though present in every community, had no legal voice at all. The Republic of Liberty had been born, but its borders were already moral as much as physical. Why white? Why restrict what seemed at first the universal promise of the revolution? For some lawmakers, it was fear. Fear that the young republic, still unstable, could not yet absorb too many differences. For others, it was habit, the unquestioned assumption that only Europeans could possess the virtues of self-government. To them, whiteness was not just skin color. It was a stand-in for civilization, reason, and character. These were the same men who had declared independence, written constitutions, and spoke of liberty as natural law. And yet, when faced with defining citizenship, they retreated into the language of exclusion. They believed they were preserving the republic, but they were, in fact, shaping its contradictions. Outside Congress, in the fields and towns of America, few people even knew the law had passed. To immigrants already here, artisans, farmers, sailors, it meant hope, a path to belonging, however narrow. To others, it had changed nothing. For enslaved people, for native nations, for women, the promise of citizenship remained a distant dream. But history rarely reveals its consequences immediately. This one would unfold slowly, over decades, centuries even. As America grew, expanded, and struggled to live up to its founding ideals, because in 1790, a door had been opened, but only part way. The first Naturalization Act was repealed just 5 years later, replaced, revised, and debated again and again. But that original phrase, free white person, would survive in law until 1952, more than 160 years after the founders wrote it down. It would shape who could vote, own property, and claim the title American. It would justify exclusion acts, alien laws, and citizenship tests. And it would haunt every immigrant who arrived on these shores, asking the same question first posed in 1790. Who belongs here? History moves quietly in the early years of the Republic. There are no great headlines, no speeches echoing through marble halls. But beneath the surface, the foundation of American identity begins to set, sometimes in ink, sometimes in silence. The Naturalization Act of 1790 becomes one of those silent foundations, rarely quoted, seldomly remembered. Yet, it defines the shape of belonging for a century and a half to come. And in the quiet of those years, the contradictions at its core start to grow roots. While Congress debates free white person, America's fields are worked by people who are neither free nor white, the enslaved men, women, and children, whose labor props up the economy of the South. The paradox is almost unbearable. The same revolutionaries who spoke of liberty as natural law, who decried monarchy as tyranny, now sit atop a system of bondage. Some of them see the irony. Few act on it. The Naturalization Act does not mention slavery, but it does not need to. By restricting citizenship to free white persons, the law quietly enshrines the racial logic that underpins slavery itself. Freedom and whiteness become intertwined. Citizenship and exclusion, two sides of the same coin. In cities like Boston, New York, and Charleston, free black men work the docks, own small shops, and pay taxes. Many fought in the Revolution. Some even bled for the cause of independence. But under the 1790 law, none of them can become citizens. They can live here, work here, even die for the Republic, yet never truly belong to it. Letters from the time revealed the frustration. Petitions were sent to state governments, asking for the rights of citizenship. Most were ignored. Some were politely denied. It would take another 75 years and a civil war before the question would even begin to change. For those excluded, the law is not just ink on parchment. It is a message, a quiet reminder that liberty in America has always come with conditions. For those who could belong, the immigrants from Ireland, Scotland, England, and Germany, but the path to citizenship was simple, at least in theory. 2 years of residence, proof of good moral character, and a declaration of loyalty to the Constitution. It was a law written for people much like the men who passed it. People of European descent, people who could be folded easily into the imagined fabric of the new nation. But even among these free white persons, there was division. Irish Catholics faced suspicion. German settlers were called unassimilable, and many in Congress still saw foreigners as necessary evil, useful labor, not true citizens. The debates that began in 1790 would resurface again and again. In the Alien and Sedition Acts, in the Know-Nothing moments, in every wave of immigration that followed, America's gates were open, but only halfway. The Naturalization Act might seem like a technicality, a bureaucratic necessity for a young republic, but its implications run deeper than any tax or treaty. It ties citizenship to race, belonging to bloodline, and it sets a precedent that the United States will struggle with for centuries. The ideas that national identity must be protected from outsiders. It's a fear born of fragility. A new nation, unsure of its own stability, drawing lines to define itself. In their minds, the founders were preserving unity, but in so doing, they were planting seeds of division that would outlast them all.
We must guard our citizenship, for it is the essence of our republic. Yet we cannot deny that America must be open to men of enterprise and virtue, who come to seek freedom.
That letter, written by Representative Thomas Hartley of Pennsylvania in 1790, captures the paradox perfectly. America's identity is both open and closed, idealistic and fearful, universal and exclusionary. This is the central tension of the American experiment. It begins here with ink on a single sheet of parchment. Over the next 30 years, the Naturalization Act will change several times. In 1795, the residency requirement is extended to 5 years. In 1798, during the paranoia of the Alien and Sedition Acts, it stretches to 14. And in 1802, it returns to 5 again. But the heart of the law free, white persons never changes. Not until the mid-20th century. It becomes the invisible skeleton in America's immigration policy. When Chinese workers arrive in 1850s, they will be denied citizenship under its logic. When Japanese farmers seek land in California, the same phrase will be used against them. And even as waves of Europeans arrive, Italians, Poles, Jews, they will face the lingering shadow of that original line. The Naturalization Act of 1790 does not just define who is American, it defines who isn't. It's tempting to look back and judge the founders by modern standards, to see hypocrisy where they saw necessity. But history is never that simple. They believed they were securing the Republic. They feared division, rebellion, infiltration. They imagined citizenship was a reward for loyalty, a privilege to be earned, not a right to be claimed. And yet, in protecting what they saw as unity, they built a system of exclusion so durable that it would take generations to unravel. The revolution had promised a new world, one where liberty and equality replaced kings and subjects. But even in that promise, there were limits. The people were not everyone, and American was not yet a universal identity. It was a guarded one. Still, America grew. New cities, new borders, new generations. Each one testing, stretching, and redefining what it meant to belong. The law of 1790 would become the quiet blueprint, both for progress and prejudice. For every wave of immigrants who found hope on American shores, there were others who found only a closed door. But every generation would also bring new voices: abolitionists, reformers, suffragists, all asking the same question first posed in the very first Congress. Who is the people? The answer, it seemed, was never fixed. It was, and remains, a conversation. In 1790, the Naturalization Act redefined the boundaries of the American Republic, but it also revealed something deeper: that the story of America is the story of inclusion and exclusion, of ideals and their limits. To understand how America became what it is today, we must return to that moment when a nation, fresh from revolution, decided what it meant to belong. And as we will see in the next part, these 6 words, any alien being a free white person, would shape far more than immigration law. They would shape race, power, and identity itself. In 1790, Congress passed the first Naturalization Act. A single sentence, barely 200 words, quietly drew a line in the sand. Citizenship is for free white persons. It was a small phrase, 6 words, yet it carried weight far heavier than anyone in that first session could fully comprehend. Those words would shape the social, political, and moral landscape of the United States for more than a century. They codified a racial hierarchy into law, linking whiteness, freedom, and political right in a way that had become the blueprint for exclusion. And they did so with a subtlety that made them easy to overlook until you felt their effects. The phrase free white persons was not accidental. The framers of the law were men steeped in Enlightenment ideas. They wrote about liberty, equality, and natural rights. Yet they also lived in a world of slavery, indentured servitude, and colonization. To them, whiteness was not merely skin. It was a proxy for civility, loyalty, and moral capacity. Being free was equally important. Enslaved people, no matter their origin, were automatically excluded. Thus, the lines drew an invisible yet rigid fence. Inside it, citizenship and political participation. Outside it, subjugation and exclusion. It was a subtle form of power, one that could shape generations without raising a single voice in opposition. At least, at first. Let's be precise. The law, specifically, any alien being a free white person of good character could apply for naturalization. It said nothing about women, nothing about Black Americans, nothing about indigenous peoples. And therein lies the moral contradiction. The new republic had just fought a revolution for freedom, but that freedom was gendered, racialized, and class-bound. Only men, free, white men, could participate fully in the life of the republic. Women could be wives, mothers, or property owners in some states, but they could not vote, sit on juries, or claim citizenship in their own right. African Americans, whether free or enslaved, remained outside the legal boundaries of belonging. Native nations, meanwhile, were treated as foreign entities, not members of polity at all. It was, in essence, a law that defined who counted as human in the eyes of the state. The concept of whiteness in 1790 was not a single fixed category. It was constructed, debated, and defended in Congress, in courts, and in everyday life. Some lawmakers were explicit. Representative Abraham Baldwin of Georgia argued that citizenship should be limited to Europeans because only they could be trusted to uphold Republican ideals. Others were more subtle. They spoke of moral character, education, as missions, all coded language for race. To them, whiteness was synonymous with civilization, with virtue, with the capacity to govern oneself and participate in politics. It was a logic that would echo through the 19th century, influencing immigration policy, property law, and even schooling. The law's exclusion was not just theoretical. They had immediate consequences. Free Black communities, like those in Philadelphia and Boston, were denied political rights. Native Americans were increasingly pressured to cede land or face removal. Excluded legally, socially, and culturally. Women had few avenues to naturalize independently. Married women's citizenship followed their husbands, leaving them invisible to the legal system. Meanwhile, European immigrants, even those of modest means, could apply for citizenship, but only after demonstrating good moral character and years of residence. It created a hierarchy not just of race, but wealth, education, and status. The law reinforced the idea that America belonged to a certain kind of people. How did Americans justify this? Some argued pragmatically the young nation was fragile. A uniform population would stabilize politics, prevent factionalism, and create loyalty. Others relied on Enlightenment rhetoric twisted into racial terms. Whiteness, they argue, was compatible with reason and civil virtue. People of other races, they claimed, were incapable of self-governance, a notion now deeply flawed, but widely accepted at the time. And yet, the contradictions gnawed at the conscience of the Republic. How could a nation found on universal liberty systematically deny it to so many? The question would haunt debates over slavery, suffrage, and immigration for decades. The Naturalization Act of 1790 established a legal precedent. By codifying citizenship along racial lines, it created a framework that subsequent laws would follow. In the mid-19th century, Chinese immigrants faced outright exclusion under federal law. In the late 1800s, laws barred Japanese immigrants from owning land in many states. Even European immigrants faced scrutiny, with courts deciding who counted as white enough to naturalize. These three words, free white person, were wielded like a sword, determining who could rise, who could vote, and who could belong. Not everyone accepted these boundaries quietly. Immigrants petitioned, sued, and lobbied to prove their whiteness, their morality, their right to citizenship. Free black communities documented contributions, military service, and property ownership to challenge their exclusion. Yet the law remained rigid. It reflected the founders' vision, a republic limited, cautious, protective of a narrowly defined identity. And this vision would shape American social hierarchies for generations. The Naturalization Act's radical restrictions created more than legal boundaries. It shaped social expectations, political participation, and national identity. It told women their rights were secondary. It told Black and Indigenous people that freedom, property, and belonging were conditional. It told immigrants from some nations that they were welcome and others that they were not. In short, it was a law that wrote the nation's moral geography. Freedom in 1790 was not universal. Citizenship was a prize, not a right. And whiteness, male gender, and moral conformity were the keys to unlocking it. The Naturalization Act of 1790 did more than govern law. It created a social contract of exclusion, one that defined America as much as who it left out as by who it let in. For the nation, this was both a practical decision and a moral compromise. To ensure stability? Yes, but it did so at the cost of the very ideals of liberty and equality it claimed to uphold. By the 1790s, the United States was still finding its footing. The Revolutionary War had ended, yet the country remained fragile, its institutions untested, its people divided. Amidst this uncertainty, the Naturalization Act of 1790 was more than a law about immigration. It was a statement about power, about identity, about who counted as part of this fledgling nation. This law would touch every corner of society, not just those seeking citizenship. It would shape politics, social hierarchies, and the very idea of the American people. In passing the act, Congress created something remarkable, a legal framework for citizenship, 2 years residence, good moral character, and the crucial qualifier, free white person. On paper, it seemed orderly, simple, even neutral. But in practice, it codified exclusion. It marked the first time the federal government formally defined who could be considered a member of polity. And that decision had enormous consequences for the young nation. It created a legal template for immigration policy. It influenced voting rights. It dictated social hierarchy. And it quietly affirmed a central truth. America was defining itself not only by who it welcomed, but also who it rejected. The link between citizenship and political power was immediate. Voting rights were largely tied to state citizenship, which in turn depended on federal law for naturalized residents. Only citizens could hold office, serve on juries, and participate fully in civic life. By restricting citizenship to free white men, the act effectively concentrated political power in the hands of a narrow demographic, to ensure that, in the early republic, governance remained in the hands of those who fit a particular racial, gendered, and social profile. Even as the country expanded geographically, the moral boundaries set in 1790 traveled with it. The 1790s and early 1800s were a period of dramatic expansion. The country doubled in size with the Louisiana Purchase. New territories, new population, new questions of belonging. Who would these lands belong to? Would native nations retain sovereignty? Could immigrants settle freely and become citizens? The Naturalization Act provided some answers, but only partial ones. Citizenship remained limited, racialized, gendered, and tied to property and class. These limits would reverberate as settlers moved west, as states joined the Union, and as the federal government wrestled with governance across a growing continent. The Naturalization Act also revealed tension between law and ideal. The Declaration of Independence had proclaimed universal liberty. The Constitution had promised a republic of the people. And yet, the first federal law on citizenship drew a line that left many people outside the promise of liberty. It was a contradiction the founders understood, even if they justified it. Some feared too much inclusion would destabilize the young nation. Others believed inclusion could only come after assimilation, by race, by culture, by moral standards. In either case, the law revealed something profound. National identity was as much a legal construct as a cultural one. For European immigrants, the Naturalization Act offered a pathway, limited, cautious, conditional. They had to prove residence. They had to demonstrate moral character. They had to assimilate, at least superficially, into the culture and political norms of the young republic. For those who succeeded, the promise was tangible: citizenship, land ownership, political voice. For those who failed, they were excluded entirely. The promise was denied. The law created a nation of insiders and outsiders. It defined not just citizenship, but belonging. And it made race, gender, and morality the gatekeepers of American identity. Perhaps the most striking tension of the act lay in the silence on slavery. The law did not mention enslaved people, yet it implicitly acknowledged them as excluded from the Republic. It assumed that citizenship would be free and that freedom was tied to whiteness. Enslaved men and women, no matter their labor, no matter their contributions, remained outside the moral and legal framework of the nation. Even free Black Americans, those who owned property, paid taxes, and served in militias, were barred from the path to citizenship. The law codified a hierarchy that placed white male freedom at the center of the American political universe. The judiciary would soon face cases testing these boundaries. Courts would interpret the phrase "free white person" with surprising rigor. Who counted as white? Could someone from the Middle East, from India, from the Caribbean naturalize? Courts often applied broad interpretations for Europeans, narrow for others. Their decisions reinforced racialized logic of the law. Citizenship was not just a legal matter, it was a societal declaration of identity, reinforced by every court ruling, every legislative action, every social interaction. Even in the early republic, the act sparked debate. Political parties argued over how inclusive naturalization should be. Federalists worried about loyalty and assimilation. Republicans wanted to encourage immigration for growth and expansion. Yet no one challenged the racial or gender limitations directly. It was simply accepted that citizenship was for free white men. And in that acceptance, a precedent was set, one that would influence debates on immigration and civil rights for generations. The Naturalization Act of 1790 created the framework for citizenship. It shaped politics, guided courts, and dictated who could participate in the life of the nation. It codified exclusion. It reinforced racial and gender hierarchies. And it became a reference point for every immigration law, every debate about citizenship for the next century. Its influence was subtle, persuasive, and enduring. The Act reminds us that law is never neutral. It reflects the values, fears, and assumptions of those who write it. And it shapes who belongs. It shapes a nation's identity. By tying citizenship to race, gender, or moral judgment, the Naturalization Act of 1790 drew the first boundaries of American identity. Boundaries that would persist, evolve, and be contested for generations. The Naturalization Act of 1790 set the stage. It defined who could become an American, who could participate in the Republic, and who was forever excluded. But the story does not end there. As America expanded westward, industrialized, and confronted the moral and political challenges of slavery, immigration, and civil rights, the law was tested, stretched, challenged, rewritten, again and again. This is the story of those struggles, the story of change. By the mid-19th century, waves of immigrants were arriving in America. Germans fleeing revolution, Irish fleeing famine, Scandinavians seeking farmland, all seeking the promise of freedom, land, and opportunity. The Naturalization Act allowed these immigrants to become citizens, but only if they were white and assimilated. And even then, the path was uneven. Residency requirements varied. Local officials often imposed subjective tests, and prejudice ran rampant. Irish Catholics, for example, faced superstition and hostility. They were often seen as too foreign, too loyal to the Pope, too different from the Protestant fabric of the nation. Yet they fought, petitioned, and ultimately became part of the American citizenry. A slow negotiation between law, culture, and persistence. The most profound challenge to the original act came from within: slavery and the Civil War. Black men, once excluded from citizenship by law, fought and died for the Union. Their struggle forced the nation to confront the legal contradictions at its core. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment promised citizenship to all born or naturalized in the United States. Suddenly, the narrow definition of the 1790 law, free white persons, was challenged head-on. Yet, even with amendments, legal and social barriers remained. State laws, local practices, and federal restrictions continued to limit the full realization of citizenship for Black Americans. The Act's legacy of exclusion lingered, embedded in the structures of law, property, and voting rights. Even as the nation reckoned with race and civil rights, the racial logic of 1790 shaped immigration law. In the late 19th century, Congress passed laws explicitly excluding Chinese immigrants. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act barred almost all Chinese laborers from naturalizing. Japanese, South Asians, and even non-European groups were also excluded. Courts cited the precedent of the 1790 law to justify racial restrictions. The three words, free white persons, was interpreted, extended, and enforced across generations. For those immigrants, the American dream remained conditional. Legal doors were open to some, firmly closed to others, and always along racial lines. Women, too, remained constrained by the Act's legacy. For much of the 19th century, a woman's citizenship was tied to her husband. Marriage could confer and revoke status. Widows and unmarried women often had no legal recourse. This gendered exclusion reflected broader social attitudes. Citizenship was a masculine domain, tied to voting, property, and political voice. Only in the 20th century, after decades of suffrage struggle, would women achieve independence, claims to citizenship and political participation. Despite the rigid boundaries of the original law, Americans resisted. Activists, reformers, and lawyers pushed for more inclusive definitions. Petitions were filed, court cases were fought. Immigrant communities organized politically, challenging exclusion and demanding recognition. The Naturalization Act of 1790 was no longer a static law. It became a site of negotiation, a battlefield where the meaning of belonging, identity, and citizenship were contested constantly. The effects of the 1790 law were long-lasting. Even as reforms were enacted, the logic of exclusion persisted. Naturalization laws continued to favor Europeans. Racial and ethnic hierarchies guided who could immigrate, who could own property, who could vote. The act also shaped cultural attitudes. It reinforced assumptions about race, virtue, and fitness for citizenship that endured into the 20th century. America's first immigration law became more than policy. It became a moral and social framework that guided the nation's understanding of who truly belonged. The story of the Naturalization Act is not just about immigrants or Congress. It is about the tension at the heart of the American experiment: liberty and exclusion, inclusion and hierarchy, ideals and compromise. From these three words, free white person, the law created structure that defined access to rights, property, and political power. It shaped not only law, but culture, social norms, and the very identity of the nation. And while America expanded, industrialized, and transformed, the challenges of 1790 remained. The nation learned slowly, and often painfully, that citizenship was not a mere legal status. It was a moral and social claim. The Naturalization Act of 1790 began as a narrow law for a young republic. Over the 19th century, its principles were challenged, contested, and reinterpreted. Immigrants fought for recognition. Black Americans struggled for the promise of citizenship. Women sought independent claims to legal identity. The story of inclusion and exclusion is the story of America itself.